Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the velvet curtains of a palace where whispers weigh more than swords, and a love story once strong enough to move an empire teeters on the edge of collapse. Picture it, Constantinople, 6th century, the air thick with incense, tension, and a kind of glittering dread. Gold leaf gleams on every column. The palace gardens smell of jasmine and over-control, and inside, there's Justinian and Theodora, Emperor and Empress, husband and wife, co-rulers of the Eastern Roman Empire. And tonight, they are not speaking. You probably won't survive this marriage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the echoing halls of the great palace, your sandals brushing over mosaics that took a decade to complete and a moment to crack, thanks to the recent riot. Somewhere down a corridor, a eunuch clears his throat too politely. Candles flicker with that buttery, low light, casting long shadows that could almost be watching you back. It's quiet. Too quiet for a couple who once ruled by decree, and even quieter for two people who used to whisper secrets with their knees touching under the council table. They weren't always like this. There was a time when Justinian couldn't stop smiling at her, when Theodora would run a finger along the armrest of his throne just to remind everyone in the room that she belonged beside him, not behind him. That was their golden age. Two equals bound by ambition, ruling with grace, cunning, and a touch of shared narcissism. Their public affection was subtle, but everyone saw it. You don't fake that kind of gaze across the Senate floor. But power is a slippery thing. Justinian had climbed from humble beginnings, a peasant boy from what is now North Macedonia, to the top of a marble world. He was sharp, scholarly, a control freak with a Christ complex. Theodora, meanwhile, came from somewhere far more scandalous. Her father had worked with bays in the Hippodrome. In her early career, let's just say it wasn't politics. She had been an actress, yes, but that's a polite Byzantine way of saying she had performed in ways that didn't always involve scripts. Yet somehow, she wasn't just accepted. She was revered. Historians still argue whether Justinian truly loved her, or if she was simply too powerful to lose. Either way, it worked, for a time. Their reign began with reforms. Massive ones. You pass scrolls inked with new laws on women's rights. Theodora's fingerprints all over them. She wasn't content with being a symbol. She wanted to legislate. Protect women from trafficking. Expand divorce rights. Give widows a voice. Imagine Melania Trump drafting legislation with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's pen. Yeah, it was that weird and that impressive. Byzantine law, originally built to keep women ornamental and quiet, started shifting. Slowly, nervously. Just enough to make the men in power sit a little straighter and whisper a little louder. And yet, here you are, only a few years into the reign, and the mood is tense. Fractured, like something beautiful left out in the sun too long. A marble column near the Empress's quarters is chipped. You run your fingers along the scar in the stone. No one has repaired it yet. No one knows who's supposed to. Justinian won't order it, and Theodora hasn't spoken to him in weeks. They sleep in the same palace, but their footsteps never overlap. If he rises early for prayers, she delays hers till mid-morning. If she hosts the eunuchs in the lavender room, he pretends to be inspecting the aqueducts. There's a rhythm to their avoidance. Not dramatic, not loud, just cold. Surgical, almost Roman in its precision. Outside, the empire churns on. Borders push and retract like lungs. Taxes pour in. Rebellions smolder. But here, in the heart of power, the real earthquake is domestic. You pass a tapestry of the two of them stitched in royal purple. Justinian stands slightly taller, a golden orb in his hand. Theodora wears a diadem that looks heavier than her neck can carry. You wonder if the artist painted their eyes looking away from each other on purpose. It feels symbolic now. There's talk among the court attendants. Not open gossip, no one suicidal, but a certain kind of glance, a did-you-hear eyebrow. One rumor says Theodora's begun confiding in a former priest-turned-monk-turned something. Another claims Justinian had a scroll drawn up annulling the marriage, then burned it the next day. You don't know what to believe, but you do know that their once passionate, united rule now feels like two rival senators forced to play house. One quirky tidbit. Theodora apparently kept a peacock feather hidden in her dressing room to remind herself of her acting days. Something to ground her, or maybe just to tick off the purists who thought a courtesan could never wear a crown. Justinian hated that feather, claimed it brought bad omens. You almost expect it to flap by the next time they argue. There are no shouting matches, no thrown goblets. This isn't a soap opera. It's worse. It's silence. The kind of silence where even servants walk on the outer edges of rugs to muffle their footsteps. Where palace musicians play slightly off-key, waiting for someone to either rage or forgive. But neither happens. You peek into the council chamber, where the imperial thrones still sit side by side. Dust gathers on Theodora's cushion. This is what a marital Cold War looks like when the stakes are an entire empire. You don't know it yet, but the cracks in their relationship will soon mirror cracks in the city's foundation, literal and metaphorical. For now, you just watch, quiet as the shadows, as the couple who once reigned like gods now pretend not to see each other in their own celestial palace. You step into the memory of a marketplace long gone. Its chatter still faint in the warm wind that rolls in off the Marmara Sea. This is where you first glimpse her, not as an empress, not even as a wife, but as a girl weaving between crates of figs and amphorae, her smile sharper than the fish knives glinting in the sun. Theodora, before anyone knew her name, would echo through marble halls. She wasn't born into silk. Her father wrangled bays in the hippodrome, part of the low-tier beast-handling crew. Her mother, a dancer who scraped coins together like breadcrumbs. When Theodora's father died, the family fell hard. Her mother tried to beg for his job to be passed to her next husband, a desperate, awkward plea that involved dressing Theodora and her sisters up like orphans and parading them before the blue faction of chariot fans. It didn't work, so Theodora learned the art of survival. She entered the only profession available to women with sharp minds, sharp tongues, and no dowry: the stage. And in Byzantine Constantinople, the stage meant something closer to burlesque than Broadway. Yes, she acted, but she also danced, joked, and in some notorious performances, did things with trained geese that, well, let's just say no one left the theater unmoved. You wince at the idea, but in truth, she was brilliant. The city watched her like a wildfire. Scandalous, yes, but hypnotic. Historians still argue whether her early career should be framed as empowerment or exploitation. Some claim she used what she had to climb. Others see a woman forced into spectacle, shaped by cruelty. The truth, as always, is a little of both. Either way, you watch her ascend, not just through beauty, but through brains. She had a talent for mimicry, for politics and costume. She knew how to read an audience, whether they were drunk merchants or senators in disguise. And then, she vanished. For years, no one in Constantinople heard her name. She joined a traveling troupe eastward, reached Alexandria, possibly Antioch, possibly even Jerusalem. A spiritual detour, perhaps, or just an escape from humiliation. When she came back, she wasn't performing anymore. She wore simpler clothes, spoke with more control. She worked as a wool spinner, supposedly, but you suspect she was spinning something far greater, a plan. She met Justinian somewhere in this murky return period. Maybe at a dinner party, maybe during a petition. The records are vague, like they are afraid to admit how ordinary the moment was. But something about her confidence, her clarity, cut through the bureaucracy like a blade through baklava. You picture him now, Justinian, the emperor in waiting. Not handsome, not charming, but intense. The kind of man who read tax codes for fun and thought sleep was a personal weakness. He was planning to reform everything. Laws, religion, architecture, the alphabet if he had time. But when he met Theodora, he paused. That says something. She was 20, maybe 21. He was older, high-ranking, and absolutely smitten. It scandalized the court. A former courtesan, the niece of a bear trainer. Marry her. There were laws against it. Literal laws. So Justinian, being Justinian, changed them. That's right. He rewrote the empire's legal code so that someone of his rank could marry a former actress. He didn't hide it. He just issued a decree, signed it with imperial flair, and married her in 525. That move was equal parts romance and audacity. You walk past the church where they married. It's quieter than you imagined. No frescoes of them holding hands. No mosaics of love. Just cold marble and a faint scent of beeswax. Yet this was the beginning. The moment when two utterly unmatched lives collided and became an empire's heartbeat. And Theodora, she wasn't content to sit in the background. The moment she became Empress, she began building her own legacy. Charities for former sex workers. Religious institutions that rivaled her husband's. Private audiences with ambassadors. She didn't support Justinian. She matched him. Like steel matches flame. There's this fringe theory whispered among scholars that Theodora used knowledge from her early career. Blackmail. Names. Secrets told in darkened theater boxes. To secure her place. You can't confirm it. But you can't rule it out either. Theodora had seen men at their weakest. Their most boastful. Their most foolish. She knew how they ticked. She'd survived them. Now she outmaneuvered them. But with power comes pressure. The same people who watched her rise now watched for missteps. Some whispered that she'd hexed Justinian. Others painted her as a Jezebel, leading him astray from traditional values. A few even suggested she still kept clients under very discreet circumstances. You chuckle softly. People never change. Give them an ambitious woman and they'll invent sins to match their discomfort. Yet the couple held strong, at least in public. They were united. Partners. Theodora stood beside him in the Hagia Sophia during major dedications. She gave speeches, unheard of for a woman. She influenced foreign policy. Some ambassadors sent correspondence addressed to both of them, with Theodora's name written first. That wasn't just diplomacy, it was a power statement. The people noticed. The Senate noticed. And not everyone liked what they saw. Behind the opulence, pressure simmered. From the church, from aristocrats, from political factions waiting for a scandal juicy enough to bring everything down. You sit in on one of their race-shared dinners. Not now, in the cold distance of their later years, but back then, when they still laughed. When Theodora would slide a fig across the platter with her pinky extended, and Justinian would break character long enough to smack. When they could still be a couple, not just an institution. You savor that moment, because it doesn't last. Power made them strong, but it also made them visible. And soon, their love story would become a battleground. You walk slowly now, through the ceremonial hallways of the great palace, where the floor glitters and every surface seems to whisper that you do not belong. Hey, etiquette doesn't just matter, it rules. And as you glide deeper into the bureaucracy that binds this empire together, you begin to see it. The Byzantine court isn't a government. It's a performance. From the moment you enter, every move is choreographed. You bow at the right angle, not too low, lest you look subservient, not too shallow, lest you seem proud. You don't just speak, you craft your words like jewels. And you certainly don't laugh. Laughter belongs to commoners and fools. Here, a raised eyebrow can ruin a career. This was the world Justinian and Theodora inhabited daily, a living theater of masks, whispers, and gold-stitched paranoia. They dressed the part, of course. Justinian favored deep purples, stiff collars, and enough embroidery to clothe an entire monastery. Theodora took things even further. Her wardrobe could bankrupt a province. Silk from China, emeralds from Egypt, and headdresses that seemed designed to discourage hugs. A quirky tidbit. Theodora once wore earrings so large they had to be suspended from her headdress to avoid tearing her earlobes. True story. Suffering for fashion, an imperial tradition. But beneath the luxury lay a pit of snakes. The court was a nest of informants, sycophants, and philosophical purists all jostling for influence. There were court poets who composed flattering verses with double meanings. One line praising Theodora's wisdom, the next subtly referencing her theatrical past. Ministers who pledged loyalty with one hand while funding opposition with the other. And eunuchs, the eunuchs, who ran entire spy networks and wielded more power than most generals. UI1 now, gliding past in spotless white robes, holding a scroll you just know contains gossip too dangerous to say aloud. In this world, appearances weren't just important, they were everything. A single misstep could mean exile, or worse, a quiet reassignment to some fortress on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by goats and regret. You didn't lose favor in this court. You evaporated. Justinian tried to navigate this chaos with law. He believed in structure, codification, lists. You imagine his desk covered in neatly stacked parchments, each labeled with aggressive clarity. Tax reform, ecclesiastical disputes, to do, crush barbarians. He believed the empire could be perfected with rules. And to be fair, he made a solid attempt. His most famous project, the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal code that would influence European law for centuries. It was sweeping, elegant, and terrifying in its scope. One mainstream historical fact: portions of this code still inform modern legal systems today. Not bad for a guy who probably never smiled at a party. Theodora, on the other hand, played the game differently. Where Justinian used law, she used people. She built alliances in soft spaces, over tea with noble women, in whispered conversations with religious radicals, through letters written in code. She didn't need a scroll to change lives. She needed only her presence. But their different styles created friction. Imagine a couple trying to cook in the same kitchen, one following the recipe exactly, the other tossing in spices by instinct. You can guess how that went. Every imperial decision turned into a dance of persuasion. Justinian wanted predictability. Theodora trusted intuition. Together, they ruled. Separately, they might have ruled better. You overhear a courtier whispering to another by a carved column. They are not a pair. They are a contradiction. You almost want to correct him. They are the contradiction. And the court watched it all unfold like a tragic play. There were rumors that Theodora was planning reforms behind Justinian's back, that she was building her own network of loyalists, that she was protecting her old friends from the stage, elevating them to positions that made old noble families furious. Some of it was true. Most of it wasn't. But it didn't matter. Perception was power. You find yourself in the lavender room again, one of Theodora's favorite spaces. It smells like rosewater and ambition. She's not here, but her presence lingers. A hop rests in the corner, untouched. There's a single goblet of wine on a side table, still half full. You wonder if she left it that way on purpose, an unfinished sentence. Meanwhile, Justinian spends more time with his lawmen, drowning in revisions, edits, and counter-edits. Sometimes he goes whole days without seeing her. It isn't avoidance. It's compartmentalizing. He doesn't know how to fix what's breaking, so he hides in rules. But the rules are cracking too. The Senate has started pushing back more aggressively. Religious leaders murmur about the decadence of the palace. Even some of the palace guards, once loyal to a fault, have begun slipping extra glances at Theodora's aides. Everyone feels the tension. Everyone waits for a spark. You leave the palace briefly, stepping into the noise of the city. It's bustling, dirty, alive. Constantinople isn't falling apart yet, but something feels wrong. Bread is expensive. Factions are angry. The blues and greens, once just sports teams, are now full-on political tribes. And worst of all, people are starting to ask the question no one dared before. What happens if they separate? No empire likes uncertainty, and this one, built on divine right, mirrored ceilings, and a marriage that claimed to be unbreakable, it needs certainty. One scholar's theory suggests that Justinian's obsession with law became more intense the more his personal life unraveled. That the more he felt Theodora slipping away, the more he tried to regulate everything else. A kind of emperor's version of rearranging the furniture while the house burns down. Back in the palace, you see the couple only in passing, during ceremonies, court appearances, the occasional feast. They look united, but you know better. You've seen the gaps, felt the chill. There's a story about one of their advisors, a philosopher who dared to suggest they take a retreat together, just the two of them, time away from court, to mend what power cannot, he said. They exiled him within the week, because here's the dirty little truth. Sometimes, when a marriage is built on empire, fixing the love means undoing the power, and neither of them is ready to let go. You sit still as dust presses against the latticework windows of Theodora's private chapel. Everything here is quiet, opulently so. Even the incense rises slowly, like it knows it's interrupting. And there she is, kneeling not before an altar, but before a question. What happens when your greatest ally becomes your greatest threat? Because the truth is, their love is starting to rot. Not in some dramatic, screaming match kind of way. No, that would have been easier. This is the kind of rut that sets in quietly, like damp behind a wall. You only notice it when the ceiling sags. And right now, the ceiling is sagging. You remember when Theodora used to lean in at council meetings, her voice low, her eyes locking with Justinian's across the table. They didn't always agree, but they moved as one, like chess masters on the same side of the board. Now, you need a diplomatic envoy just to get them in the same corridor. The whispers say it started after Nika, but more on that later. For now, let's rewind to the shift that made them wobble, the moment their bond became too powerful to govern. You're at a banquet, gold plates, harp music, dancers in gauzy silks twirling with studded exhaustion. Justinian sits straight, stoic. Theodora reclines just enough to signal that she's listening, not obeying. One guest compliments a piece of legislation, a new tax regulation designed to simplify tribute from distant provinces. Justinian beams. Theodora offers a brittle smile and mutters, but not one para goes to the orphanages. It's subtle, but the tension crackles like static. He hears it. Everyone hears it, but no one says a word. This is how imperial fights go down, with weaponized small talk. Historians still argue whether they began resenting each other for policy or for power, but you suspect it was emotional. Theodora wasn't content to be merely his equal. She needed space to exist apart from him. Justinian, ever the builder, couldn't understand why love needed boundaries. He gave her a throne, a voice, a legacy. Wasn't that enough? You walk the gardens they once strolled together, now maintained by mute servants who prune with monk-like precision. Here's where she laughed at his first attempt to recite poetry. There's the bench where he whispered that her name would outlive his. And now, the gardeners avoid eye contact. They say it's for etiquette, but you know the real reason. Even plants wilt under tension this thick. One quirky tidbit. Theodora, in a fit of symbolic defiance, had a private mosaic commissioned in one of her favorite bathhouses. It showed a lioness and a scholar sitting back to back, tethered by a golden chain that they both refused to cut. When Justinian saw it, he ordered it covered with a keratin. It's still there, hidden beneath velvet. You peek at it when no one's watching. The balance of their relationship was always delicate. Power, unlike love, doesn't like to be shared. When you share love, it grows. When you share power, it fractures. Theodora began hosting her own councils, quietly at first, then openly. Her chamberlain became her chief of staff. She started endorsing bishops, founding religious centers, expanding her reach. To some, she was the true ruler. Justinian knew this. He didn't say it, but he felt it, like a knife wrapped in silk. There's a moment you won't forget. Late evening, a thunderstorm outside, the walls humming with rain. Justinian stands alone in the library, flipping through a copy of Plato. Not reading, just turning pages. Theodora enters, soaked from her own chambers. They lock eyes. No greeting. She says, "Do you trust me?" He doesn't answer. She leaves. It's that simple, and that complicated. You drift through the chapel again, now quieter than before. The icons glisten in the candlelight. You wonder if either of them ever prayed for love anymore, or just for victory. In a way, they are both trapped. Justinian can't rule without her. She knows his blind spots, his stress patterns, the crack in his public persona. She fills in where he fades. And Theodora, she can't rebel without breaking the thing she helped build. If she walks, she loses not just a husband, but her empire, her projects, her ability to protect the women who whisper her name like a prayer. It's tragic, in a way. They love each other, or maybe they used to. Now it's something else. Mutual reliance coated in historical varnish. You think back to one of their last public walks together. It was spring. Cherry blossoms. Justinian had a scroll under his arm. Theodora cared nothing. They passed through the outer forum, and someone, some brave fool, shouted, "Long live the Empress." Not the Emperor, just her. Justinian didn't flinch, but his hand clenched so tightly the scroll cracked. She didn't look at him, just kept walking. Even their silences are statements now. The Senate begins to notice. There are murmurs of policy delays. Edicts passed without signatures. One brave, or perhaps suicidal, noble suggests that imperial decisions seem conflicted. Justinian fires him within the hour. But the damage is done. Doubt has been planted. Meanwhile, the public begins to speculate. In the markets, vendors swap jokes. Why does the emperor sit alone? Because his empress is already ruling. In the taverns, poets recite verses about moon and sun battling for the same sky. It's romantic if you don't live in the empire. If you do, it's terrifying. You feel it too. That creeping sense that something foundational is coming loose. Not with an explosion, but a slow, inevitable unraveling, thread by thread. And in the middle of it all, Justinian and Theodora, bound together, burning out like twin stars circling too close. You're on your feet again, this time surrounded by noise. Not just clinking cups or murmuring nobles, but real noise, raw, human, sweaty noise. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. You're in the Hippodrome. This isn't just a racetrack. It's a cauldron of obsession, politics, and ancient sports rivalry turned street gang. The air smells like hot dust, roasted chickpeas, and fury. Tens of thousands of people jam the stands, split into two chaotic tribes, the blues and the greens. You think it's just about chariots. Please, that's like saying the Super Bowl is about football and not, power and tears. Justinian grew up a blue. Theodora's family leaned green. That should have been cute, right? A little Romeo and Juliet moment. But instead, their opposing allegiances never quite left the marriage. Like glitter from a party you never remember attending. Impossible to scrub out. By now, the blues and greens aren't just factions. They have full-on political identities. They support rival senators, clergy, and even tax policies. Imagine if sports fans could influence imperial decrees by yelling loud enough. That's what this is. And Justinian, he thought he could control them. He tried reforms to neuter their power, higher ticket taxes, tighter policing. He thought he could reason with the mobs like they were Senate committees. But you can't debate with a drunk man in blue face paint whose cousin just got arrested for throwing a cabbage at a tax collector. The result? Chaos. Theodora warned him. She told him to go softer, to negotiate through their ringleaders, to pretend he cared, at least publicly. But Justinian didn't listen. He never did when law was involved. Law must prevail, he said, even over loyalty. Historians still argue whether his crackdown was about control or pride. Probably both. Either way, it backfired. One cold January in 532, it all blew up. You blink and now you're standing inside the Hippodrome on that day. The day that laughter turned to screams. It began during a race. Shouting, booing, a little stone throwing. Nothing unusual. But then someone, no one sure who, started chanting Nika. Victory. And like the flipping of a switch, the word caught fire. Nika, Nika. It echoed like a war cry. The blues and greens, normally at each other's throats, suddenly united in rage against the emperor, against taxes, against corruption, against everything. It was like watching dogs team up against their master. You duck as the first wave of violence erupts. Stones, torches, bodies surging. The chariot teams flee. The guards fall back. And within hours, the Hippodrome becomes the heart of a full-scale insurrection. Fires spread. Buildings collapse. Prisoners are released. Senators who've been quietly sharpening their knives now move openly. The mob demands Justinian step down. He considers it. Yes, seriously. The man who codified law across half the known world almost quits because the crowd is too loud. He begins planning an escape, packs his valuables, prepares a ship, and here's where Theodora makes history. They in a panic, imperial advisors shouting, eunuchs running, smoke in the air. Justinian says they'll flee and regroup elsewhere. Theodora doesn't blink. She says the line that will haunt every biography ever written about her. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. I will not flee. Purple is a fine color for a shroud. MIC drop. You feel the room go still. Even now, so many centuries later, that sentence makes your spine tighten. She basically tells her husband, die like an emperor or live like a coward. You'll move. One quirky detail. There's a legend that she wasn't wearing purple when she said it. Just plain wool robes. That she later changed outfits, as if preparing for the last scene of her life to match the script she wrote in real time. Whatever the truth, her words work. Justinian stays. And within days, he unleashes hell. His general, Belisarius, storms the hippodrome with troops. The mob is still there, tens of thousands strong. They mid-chant when the gates slam shut. What happens next is brutal. No need to linger. Just know that 30,000 people die in an afternoon. 30,000. The city falls silent. The fires extinguish, and the air hangs heavy with ash and memory. You step outside, your sandals crunching on charred marble. The smell of smoke clings to your hair. Constantinople has survived, but barely. And something else didn't survive them. Because after that day, something inside Justinian and Theodora breaks. They've faced the apocalypse together and won, but it didn't bring them closer. If anything, it drove a wedge. He resents her for cornering him into violence. She resents him for needing to be cornered in the first place. Their eyes don't meet in meetings anymore. When they pass each other in the palace, it's like a draft through an open window. Cold, abrupt, gone. People notice. The Senate begins holding informal sessions behind their backs. The church murmurs. One advisor is heard whispering. They rule the ashes together, but no longer the fire. And you, silent, invisible, watchful, know this is the turning point. They stood on the edge of collapse. They didn't fall. But love isn't fireproof. You walk through the scorched remnants of a city that still smells faintly of panic. Constantinople, just weeks after the Nika riots, is quieter than usual. The cobblestones are swept, but the soot lingers like a ghost on every surface. The walls are intact, but brittle, and in the heart of it all stands Justinian, triumphant, exhausted, and impossibly alone. He doesn't speak of that day. He signs decrees with steady hands. He appears at services in Hagia Sophia. He receives foreign envoys and nods at reports from generals fighting in Italy. But in the moments between, when no one is watching, you see him pause. A little too long. A breath that doesn't quite steady him. And beside him, or rather not beside him, is Theodora, who saved his throne and broke his pride in the same sentence. They haven't shared a private dinner since the riots. You overhear a servant whisper that Theodora has taken to eating alone in the lavender room, refusing most invitations, rarely leaving her quarters. When Justinian passes by, she doesn't look up. Once, she sent him a tray of figs, a peace offering, a joke. No one knows. He sent them back untouched. You'd think surviving a civil collapse together would bond them. But the opposite happened. Now, every conversation is a negotiation. Every shared space a battlefield with rugs and chandeliers. Theodora still attends court, still commands the respect of nobles and clergy. But the warmth, gone. She's colder, sharper, like a statue that's been polished until its edges cut. You see it during one council meeting. The topic, rebuilding the city. Architects lay out plans, draw scrolls, make suggestions. Theodora speaks up. We rebuild better, wiser, and we house the widows of the hippodrome first. Justinian says nothing. His silence is a statement. Historians still argue whether this post-riot rift was emotional or ideological. Did they disagree on how to rule, or simply stop needing each other? Either way, something elemental between them is missing. Their bond once made them dangerous. Now, it makes them volatile. There's a new tension in the palace, thick, invisible, and deeply personal. One quirky detail you pick up from a gossip-prone chambermaid. Theodora commissioned a second, secret wardrobe room. Not for vanity, for space. She didn't want her gowns brushing against his robes. Yes, it's petty. Yes, it's imperial-grade pettiness. But it's also deeply human. Even empresses need boundaries when love curdles. Meanwhile, the empire itself is having its own little identity crisis. Half the city's population is dead. A huge swath of aristocratic families were either trampled, burned out, or stripped of power during the aftermath. Rebuilding means rewriting power dynamics. Theodora pushes for women's refuges and public bathhouses. Justinian wants basilicas and fortresses. Neither wants to say it outright, but they are building separate futures now. One for the body, one for the soul. You stroll past Hagia Sophia, still under reconstruction. Its skeleton looms over the city like a question mark. Workers haul marble and gold leaf in silence. No songs, no chatter, just labor. Inside, Theodora's iconographers are already at work on her future mosaic, the one that will immortalize her for centuries. She watches from a distant gallery. You wonder what she sees. An image of power, of peace, or just a version of herself that feels nothing anymore. Later that night, you pass her chamber. A eunuch stands guard outside, expressionless. Inside, you hear only the soft click of a loom. Theodora weaving something, perhaps, or unweaving herself. Justinian, meanwhile, spends his evenings with scrolls and bishops. His current obsession, a new legal reform for property inheritance. He works late, long after the candles have burned into stumps. A senator once joked that Justinian only stops writing laws when his ink freezes. That's not far off, but you begin to realize that all this legislation, all this rebuilding, it's a distraction. Neither of them is truly healing. They're just hiding behind projects. In one particularly telling moment, Justinian meets with his generals and misquotes his own decree. The room goes silent. He corrects himself, but you see the twitch in his jaw. He's tired, not physically, but soul deep. The kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. You pause in the Imperial Library. There's a book here, thin, bound in faded leather, that once belonged to Theodora's private collection. A collection Justinian ordered moved out of the main archives. Why? No one knows. But the implication was clear. Her thoughts are no longer his to read. The empire stands, somehow, but its foundation is cracking. You look up at the ceiling, where painted angels float above legal codes and imperial crests. It's beautiful and suffocating. Hey, in the aftermath of fire, everything is in its place, but nothing is as it was. The palace has been cleaned, repaired, gilded anew. But under the plaster, you feel the fissures, the whispered arguments, the notes passed between advisors, the looks exchanged across the throne room like stray arrows. They don't speak of the riots, but they live in them still. And you, standing here, start to wonder, which was more dangerous, the fire that consumed the city, or the silence that followed? You step into the imperial bedchamber at dusk, and it feels more like a museum than a room for love. The silence here is thick, like it's afraid to be broken. Everything is in place. Twin basins, carved cedar wardrobes, matching goblets etched with peacocks. A perfect symmetry that mocks the mess it hides. The bed itself, though grand, has begun to sag in the middle, as if even the furniture knows what's coming. This is where trust used to live. You see echoes of it in the details. The rose oil Theodora once used, still uncorked but long forgotten. A gold comb resting exactly where she left it during their last conversation here. And that small tear in the canopy. No one's fixed it. Probably because no one wants to acknowledge that anything is broken at all. They sleep in separate chambers now. No announcement was ever made. It just happened. A few days after the final riot embers were swept from the square, Theodora requested a new bedroom, one with better morning light, she claimed. Justinian didn't argue. He signed the request with that same flat pen stroke he uses for condemning tax evaders. The logistics were handled in silence, with the palace stewards moving her belongings one box at a time, careful not to drag anything loud across the floors. You think separation might bring peace. It doesn't. Now the palace feels like a soundstage built for a play no one believes in anymore. They make appearances together, of course. For feasts, ceremonies, dedications. You watch them sitting on twin thrones, still coordinated in purple, still photogenic in mosaic form, but their bodies angle ever so slightly away from one another, a detail only the marble notices. And at night, you wander past her new wing, and it's full of laughter. Quiet, contained, but unmistakably real. Her ladies-in-waiting speak more freely now. They read poetry aloud, even joke in front of her. Theodora laughs sometimes, not the belly-deep kind, but the tight, sharp one that says she's in control again. Meanwhile, Justinian's side of the palace sounds like a monastery. His scribes barely breathe when they deliver reports. He walks at odd hours, sometimes barefoot, sometimes murmuring lines from obscure church fathers like they'll hold his empire together. He doesn't visit her rooms. Not once. But he does send gifts, neutral ones. Scented scrolls, rare fruits, a chessboard from Armenia carved in ivory. Each returned, unopened, sometimes accompanied by a polite note, sometimes not. There's one particularly awkward incident involving a pet monkey that had belonged to a foreign envoy. Don't ask, just know it bit someone, and the symbolism was not subtle. One quirky detail, they maintain a shared calendar. Still, every feast, every state visit, every fasting day, they mark it together, as if their love still lives in scheduling. Maybe that's the last string holding them together. Duty. They were crowned together. After all, divorce isn't an option. Not for them. Not with bishops watching, nobles waiting, and half the empire just itching to whisper, "I told you so." Historians still argue whether Justinian considered it. There are stories, fragments, really, that he once asked his legal advisors about a hypothetical separation between sovereigns. Not a divorce, just a delegation of conjugal unity. It was denied, of course. Theodora, by law and by legend, was untouchable. You don't cast aside the woman who held your crown up when you nearly ran. And Theodora, she makes no move either. If she plotted something, exile, manipulation, replacement, she never showed it. Instead, she settled into a rhythm of near absence. Not distant enough to spark alarm, just enough to hurt. And oh, it hurts. You see it in the small things. Justinian misses details now. He once remembered every courtier's birthday. Now he forgets names. During a sermon, he quotes the wrong saint. In a legal decree, he references a province that no longer exists. It's not incompetence, it's distraction. Like half of him still lingers at her old door. Meanwhile, she's rising again. Stronger, cooler. Her charities expand. Her political allies, once loyal to him, now pass through her chambers first. You watch a bishop bow to her more deeply than to Justinian, and she receives it with a tilt of the head that says, "Yes, you understand." She is not just Empress now. She is separate. There's a moment, brief, so fleeting you almost miss it, that captures everything. A festival evening, lanterns glowing, music echoing in the upper galleries. Justinian arrives late, eyes tired, robes disheveled just enough to worry the court. Theodora stands already at the dais, radiant in gold. Their eyes meet across the room, and neither of them blinks. You think, for a heartbeat, they might cross the room, that he might offer a hand, and she might take it. That history might pivot right there, under the red lantern light. But instead, they nod. Just nod, like strangers with a shared past and no future. You turn from the window now, and the sky over Constantinople is thick with cloud. A storm is coming again, not of flames and riots, but of quiet unraveling, the kind that topples empires from within. and in their separate chambers, Justinian and Theodora lie awake, apart but equal, staring at ceilings they once decorated together. You trail your fingers along the edge of a silk curtain as you move through the narrower halls of the imperial quarters, places less ceremonial, more private, where the scent of rose oil doesn't mask the truth quite so well. These are the corridors of whispers, where servants carry trays with one hand and secrets with the other, where a glance between doorways can ruin a reputation. And tonight, the whispers are louder than ever. You hear it first in a laundry room. Yes, even emperors have laundry. A linen maid, young and careless with volume, says something about Theodora and the chamberlain. You freeze, just long enough to catch the rest. He stayed too late. Again. You knew this was coming. Power invites rumor like honey draws ants. And Theodora, she's a feast. Beautiful, distant, in control of her own wing of the palace. Of course, people would start to invent stories to explain the distance. Stories where she finds comfort elsewhere. A bishop mentions it later. Subtly, of course. There's concern, he says, about propriety in the Empress's inner circle. He says it like a man dropping poison into a well and pretending it's holy water. Historians still argue whether Theodora was ever unfaithful. Some say yes, pointing to vague letters and court records where unnamed male visitors were noted at unusual hours. Others scoff, insisting she was far too careful, too calculating. You don't know the truth. No one does. But what matters isn't truth. It's plausibility. Because Justinian hears the rumors, and for the first time in years, you see him flinch. He says nothing. He asks no questions. But his staff knows to tread lightly. He begins to cancel appearances that include Theodora. He reviews the security logs for the lavender wing. Twice. He even has the hinges of her chamber doors replaced, under the guise of safety. That's not paranoia. That's paying with a toolkit. And Theodora, she doesn't flinch. She keeps her appointments, receives envoys, holds court with her ladies. When she hears the rumors, she simply says, "Let them whisper." It gives their tongues something to do besides beg for favors. You almost admire her for that one. But behind closed doors, she's not untouched. One evening, you spot her alone in the small oratory, kneeling before a candlelit icon of Mary. Her shoulders tremble, just once, then still, like a wave that breaks in secret. The whispers don't stop. They multiply. A palace baker swears he saw a hooded figure leaving the Empress's garden suite before dawn. A guardsman claims to have overheard a man's voice in the lavender quarters after curfew. The imperial librarian finds a poetry scroll misfiled, one that speaks of secret meetings under moonlight. He says nothing, but files it under fiction with trembling hands. One quirky rumor. Someone spreads the idea that Theodora's cat, yes, her actual Persian cat, has been trained to deliver love notes in its collar. No one can confirm it, but suddenly, half the eunuchs are watching that cat like it's a spy. But it's not just Theodora who draws suspicion. Some suggest that Justinian has grown close to one of his deacons. Too close. That the long walks through the gardens aren't just for theology. That the letters exchanged between them are written in ciphers. The gossip doesn't care who it's about anymore. It just wants blood. And in the midst of this storm, the empire watches. The Senate leans in. The bishops sniff for scandal. Foreign courts start sending envoys with veiled questions. Is the imperial couple still united? One ambassador asks, eyes wide with feigned innocence. United? Please. They haven't spoken alone in months. And yet they function. That's the surreal part. Decrees are signed. Processions happen. Theodora still appears beside Justinian for liturgical rites, her hands clasped just close enough to his to seem coordinated. But you see the difference now. They don't look at each other. Not really. Their eyes meet, then immediately slide away like soap in a basin. You find yourself wondering, what is worse, fury or indifference? Because they are long past the anger now. There's no shouting, no tearful confrontations. There's just calculation. A marriage built on power has become a machine of habit. They are locked in mutual surveillance, each waiting for the other to blink. One morning, you pass by Theodora's study. There's a letter on the desk, half burned in the brazier. You make out just one line before the flame takes it. We used to be each other's shelter. Was it hers? His? A forgery? Does it matter? Even the inkwells here smell like betrayal now. And the palace, once a symbol of divine unity, starts to splinter. Not physically. No earthquakes. No collapses. Just socially. Advisors begin choosing sides. Some align quietly with Justinian, law clerks, military attachés, the older guard. Others cluster near Theodora, young senators, female scribes, the spiritual radicals she's protected for years. One moment seals the shift. During a public audience, a petitioner drops to her knees, not before the emperor, but Theodora. She cries, begs, praises her for mercy in a case involving widowed mothers. Justinian's face freezes. He doesn't interrupt, but the tightness in his grip on the throne's armrest says everything. They were once a single force. Now, they are gravitational bodies circling the same sun, unable to collide, unable to drift apart. And you begin to understand that this isn't a matter of whether their marriage will survive. It's a matter of how many rooms it will take to contain the collapse. You find yourself deep within the Senate wing now, where the marble feels colder, and even the torchlight flickers like it's second-guessing itself. The men who gather here speak in careful tones, choosing their words like chess moves. You watch them debate policy, taxation, border disputes. But underneath every word, there's a shadow topic none of them dares to name too directly: the imperial marriage. Because it's not just emotional anymore, it's legal. You hear the rustle of parchment as a junior senator discreetly passes a scroll to his superior. It's nothing dramatic, no betrayal, no uprising, just a suggestion, a motion, a law, still wet with ink, that would quietly shift power from imperial partnership to imperial designation. Meaning, Justinian could rule without her, on paper at least. Strip her of co-ruler status. Assign her ceremonial duties. No divorce. No disgrace. Just a slow fade from the throne. And yes, he considers it. Justinian reads the scroll in private. No aides. No scribes. He doesn't tell Theodora. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you see him hesitate, eyes darting across the lines like a man trying to solve a riddle written in guilt. He doesn't sign it. Not that day. But the scroll is never destroyed either. It lives in his private archive, tucked among edicts about tariffs and grain distribution. Historians still argue whether that law was ever meant to be used, or if it was simply leverage. A reminder to Theodora that her crown, like everything else in the empire, could be rewritten. And Theodora, she finds out anyway. She always does. One of her informants, perhaps a young clerk with a crush, passes her a copy. You don't see her rage. You don't even see tears. What you see is far more terrifying: resolve. The next morning, she cancels her meetings, rewrites the week's court schedule, and, subtly, reassigns two of Justinian's closest legal advisors to distant, irrelevant posts. One to a border province, the other to a monastic archive. For their health, she says. You blink, and suddenly the palace is a chessboard again. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's a constitutional crisis in high heels. And yet, still, no one says it out loud. The law is never introduced. Theodora never confronts him. They keep up appearances, barely. But now the weight of their silence is matched by law itself. They could break. They are just too afraid to do it first. You move through the great archive chamber now, filled with rolls of parchment, many still bearing the wax seal of a united reign. 2 profiles pressed into purple. You run your fingers across one seal. It's cracked. That night, Justinian hosts a dinner. Theodora attends, late and luminous, wearing a sapphire robe with gold trim. She takes her place without a glance at him. The guests, ambassadors from Persia, Rome, and a few bishops, watch like birds waiting for crumbs. They are looking for a sign. The moment arrives over dessert. One ambassador raises a glass and says, "To the wisdom of your shared governance." It's a simple toast. Innocent, even, but you feel the air stiffen. Justinian raises his glass, says nothing, drinks. Theodora smiles. She doesn't drink, and that's all it takes. Rumors fly before the wine's even cooled. One quirky story. A Persian envoy later wrote home describing the moment as colder than a winter on the Caspian Sea. He apparently also asked whether it was culturally appropriate to send separate gifts to the emperor and empress, just in case. Outside the palace, the mood is shifting too. You visit the market square, where a vendor hawks clay figurines of the imperial couple. Used to be, they sold fast. Now, they sit dusty on the shelf. "Make me one with just her," a young woman says. He looks tired. Tired. The word spreads like mold. People still respect Justinian, sure, but they are watching Theodora now, closely. Her policies, her charity work, her decisions. The idea that she could be more than empress, that she could rule alone, is no longer whispered. It's theorized, and Justinian sees it. He orders an increase in public ceremonies, more appearances together, more dedications with both names carved in stone. But you can't carve love back into being. And no amount of incense masks the awkwardness of 2 people trying to share a spotlight while standing on different stages. One afternoon, you find him alone in the basilica's southern gallery. No guards, no advisors, just him, standing beneath the great mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, staring up like he's asking for a different script. He mutters something. You lean in. I made her too powerful to lose. It's not regret exactly. It's just realization. Because here's the paradox. The very thing that made Theodora the perfect partner, her mind, her strength, her independence, is the same thing that now makes her impossible to contain. She cannot be a shadow. She was never meant to be. So what does Justinian do? Nothing. Not yet. He puts the scroll back in its place, orders wine for the evening, drafts a law on aqueduct maintenance. Because emperors, like anyone else with a broken heart, sometimes just need something to do with their hands. And you? You start to see it clearly now. This is not a story about betrayal. It's a story about boundaries. And the terrifying moment when 2 people realize they no longer live inside the same empire. You wake to the creak of palace floors that were once silent. There's movement in the dark now. Subtle, rhythmic. Servants who used to tiptoe past both bedchambers now hesitate, uncertain of which throne they truly serve. Because the imperial household has begun to split. Not in rebellion. In protocol. There are now 2 courts under one roof. It started quietly. A mid-morning meeting here. A private reception there. Suddenly, invitations bear separate seals. One with Theodora's floral crest. One with Justinian's eagle. The excuse. Efficiency. The truth. Division. You notice it everywhere. Dinner schedules are staggered. He dines with military advisors at dusk. She hosts bishops over a late supper. He visits aqueduct sites with city engineers. She meets with midwives and women's guilds in the courtyard. They don't avoid each other. They root around each other, like water flowing around a stone. And the staff, they pick sides. Not openly. No one's that foolish, but subtly. A cook starts using Theodora's preferred spices again. A guard sharpens Justinian's sword first, even if it's untouched. Theodora's messengers wear lavender trim. Justinian's wear red. You might think it's nothing, but in a palace built on symbol and hierarchy, trim can be war. You follow a scribe through the scroll room. She now writes 2 copies of every major document, one for each imperial archive. Her hand shakes slightly. I keep them identical, she says. Exactly. But sometimes I wonder if I should stop pretending they are. A law is passed about dock inspections. It bears only Justinian's signature. 2 days later, a new edict emerges about protections for widows on maritime routes. It's unsigned but bears Theodora's handwriting. Everyone recognizes it. No one dares say a word. Historians still argue whether this was technically legal. Could an empress rule by pen? The texts are ambiguous, probably intentionally, but people follow the order. Because when Theodora speaks, things happen. You drift past the audience chamber. Once the beating heart of the empire's administration, it now feels like a diplomatic no man's land. The twin thrones sit untouched. Instead, Justinian meets guests in the southern vestibule. Theodora prefers the library gallery. One quirky tidbit: a foreign envoy allegedly showed up with a gift and, unsure which door to approach, left it in the middle of the hall. A basket of dates. Both of them ignored it. The basket rutted where it stood. You can smell the split now. It's in the kitchens, where separate menus are drawn up depending on who's attending. Theodora's table features lentils, figs, hunted wine. Justinian's, salted meat, olives, hard bread. No one comments, but the differences speak volumes. It's in the gardens, where paths are suddenly under renovation to avoid accidental run-ins. It's in the chapel, where they pray on different sides, and the priests offer homilies that are somehow both the same and utterly different. You listen one morning as the high priest, chosen by Justinian, preaches on the dangers of divided loyalties. That afternoon, a visiting deacon favored by Theodora reads from a scroll titled, "Two are made one in the eyes of heaven, unless the one is not worthy." Subtle, not even close. The servants stop gossiping, not because they've grown discreet, but because no one knows what's safe anymore. One wrong word, one assumption, and you're reassigned to scrub staircases an inch. All wise, promoted by the wrong ruler. Even their dogs are confused. Yes, they're dogs. Justinian had a small, scruffy hound that once slept curled near Theodora's feet. Now it paces between chambers, whining. It once followed her scent. Now it trails back to him. You can't make this up. That hound is probably the only soul in the palace still trying to reconcile them. But humans, no longer trying. Even their correspondence is separate. Justinian writes official updates to generals. Theodora responds to petitions from cities, especially ones with women's councils. Once upon a time, their joint sealed policy. Now, it's a dusty ornament. You find yourself staring at a mural, painted years ago, back when the palace was brighter. It shows the imperial couple beneath a canopy, hands joined, the city rising behind them. You wonder what would happen if someone repainted it now. Would they be looking in opposite directions? Would the sky still be gold, or something grayer? One evening, you catch a peculiar moment. They pass each other in the vestibule. Not planned, not dramatic, just an overlap. Theodora is mid-sentence with a foreign guest. Justinian exits a council room, flanked by aides. Their eyes meet. Briefly, you think, maybe, but no. They nod, just a nod, like colleagues at a tedious convention. And then they are gone again. Even in this coldness, the empire persists. Coins are minted. Laws are passed. The Hagia Sophia nears completion. But you can feel it now, can't you? That sense that all of it, this city of marble and mosaics, rests on the shoulders of a marriage that no longer exists in any meaningful way. It's all performance. Two sovereigns, one empire, and a silence so carefully rehearsed, it might as well be policy. And you're still walking the halls, still listening to doors that never open, still wondering which court you'd serve, if you had to choose. Because soon, someone will. You're in a room few enter now, where no guards stand watch and no scrolls get filed. The air here is heavy, not with incense or politics, but with grief. You wouldn't know it at first glance. Everything is pristine, curtains drawn just right, cushions perfectly aligned, but it's the absence that speaks. An imperial chamber prepared for a child who never made it past infancy. Their daughter. You didn't know, did you? Most don't. The records are silent. Justinian rarely mentioned her, and Theodora. Well, you'll learn soon enough that silence was her fiercest armor. Historians still argue over the child's name. Some sources claim it was Anastasia, others say Julia, and a few believe no name was ever officially recorded. The child died young, likely of fever, or perhaps a birth complication. There's no mosaic, no public dedication, just this quiet room, a chamber of memory. You step inside. There's a painted toy horse in the corner, its gold fading from time. A child-sized cloak, never worn. A carved swan rucker missing one eye. And on the central table, a faded embroidery, unfinished. You trace the stitches with your fingers. Theodora's work, they say. She stopped halfway through, because how could she finish it? You sit, alone, and feel the silence settle around you like a velvet cloak. This is where their real fracture began. Not with politics, not with scandal, but with death. They buried their grief in separate places. Justinian prayed. He turned to theologians, asked impossible questions about innocence and suffering. You find his notes in a tucked-away scroll. Passages on sin, redemption, divine justice. His script is shaky, water-damaged. Tear stains. Maybe. Or maybe he just wrote in the rain one day. Theodora, on the other hand, locked the nursery and never returned. Not until today. You catch a glimpse of her in the doorway. Not the Empress, not the legend, just a mother with tired eyes. She doesn't step inside. She simply looks, long enough for her mouth to twitch, once. Then she walks away. One quirky detail you'd never guess. She kept one of the child's toys, a carved rattle shaped like a lion, in her dressing cabinet for years. No one was allowed to touch it. Some thought it was superstition. Others suspected it was her tether to the only identity that wasn't public. Because Theodora wasn't just ruler, reformer, or wife. She was once a mother. And grief. Grief has no respect for status. You see it in their rare collisions. A remark from Justinian about the construction of an orphanage. How many cots should be built? Theodora's voice sharpens. More than one. She doesn't explain. He doesn't press. They never speak of her. Not by name. Not even obliquely. But you feel her between them like a shadow in every shared room. The public doesn't know. No decrees were issued. No mourning period announced. But the court remembers. A scribe once said the Empress changed after that winter. Her gaze grew deeper. Her voice lost its musical edge. She still ruled, but with a quieter vengeance. One bishop wrote that Theodora prayed not for salvation, but for meaning, and stopped praying altogether when she found none. Justinian, for all his theological musings, never found peace with it either. He built more churches, issued laws to protect orphans, widows, the vulnerable. It helped, a little, like patching a cracked dome with sunlight. One day, You find a single petal left on the threshold of the nursery. Not placed, dropped, perhaps. A rose petal, barely fragrant. You don't know whose it was. You only know that someone remembered. You start to notice how much of their coldness may be less about power and more about pain. Because they didn't just lose a child. They lost the one thing that might have kept them human together. Without her, they became rulers again. Fully, utterly, and alone. You see it in the choices they make. Theodora's policies shift. More aggressive protections for women. More money for maternal health. She founds hospitals that cater exclusively to mothers and newborns. No statues bear the reason why. But you know, Justinian starts commissioning art depicting divine families. Mary and Christ, Joseph, the Holy Household. He claims it's religious messaging. Maybe it is, or maybe it's something else. An echo of what he once hoped to have. At a state event one spring, a singer performs a hymn about heavenly reunions. The audience claps politely. Theodora doesn't. Justinian excuses himself early. They never talk about that either. But you catch glimpses. A nursemaid walking past the Empress with an infant in her arms. Theodora turns her head. Quickly. A boy in the streets offering figs reminds Justinian of a story he once told their daughter. He smiles for a second, then the smile curdles, and he disappears into the basilica for hours. This is the grief that never burns brightly enough for the world to notice. It just smolders. And so now, in this palace with 2 thrones, 2 calendars, 2 courts, there is a third presence, unseen, unspoken, but always there. The ghost of their daughter, who never aged, never ruled, never made her own mistakes, and yet somehow still lives between them. Every silence, every glance, every policy. You finally understand what no historian ever could fully capture. This wasn't just an empire strained by politics. It was an empire haunted by love that didn't get the chance to grow up. You step lightly now, because the ground beneath you feels suddenly unstable. Not the cobblestones, they are solid enough, but the people. The smiles too perfect, the bows too low, the questions too careful. You've entered a new phase of this unraveling, the part where betrayal wears silk robes and perfume. This is where alliances fracture. It begins subtly. A general, long loyal to Justinian, is suddenly seen taking tea in Theodora's courtyard. A senator known for quoting scripture in support of the emperor's decrees now references one of Theodora's legal reforms instead. Advisors begin to delay meetings, miss briefings, fall ill at inconvenient times. The palace is no longer just divided. It's recalculating. And spies. Oh, there are spies. You walk past a servant adjusting a curtain, only to realize he's been in the same room twice this hour. A page boy lingers after delivering scrolls, always a beat too long. One eunuch is reassigned after he's found writing letters in a cipher no one taught him. Another simply vanishes. You're not in a marriage anymore. You're in a Cold War. One side wears purple and speaks in decrees. The other wears lavender and whispers behind veils. Justinian starts to notice the shifts. His council meetings are still attended, but now with fewer nods, fewer yes, your imperial majesty affirmations. You see him squint, ever so slightly, reading the faces around him, as if wondering who already gave their loyalty elsewhere. And Theodora, she doesn't even bother wondering. She knows. Her network has always been better. She doesn't rely on the old noble houses or the military elite. She works through people with nothing to lose. Reformed courtesans turned clerks, minor bishops with radical ideas, midwives with ears in every household. She built an empire within the empire, and now it's beginning to show its teeth. One quirky tidbit. There's a rumor that Theodora had a private tunnel constructed from her quarters to the outer wall. ostensibly for security, but no one's ever confirmed it. Some say it's just a myth, invented by jealous senators. Others insist they've seen movement near the supposed entrance. Either way, the idea alone unsettles people. A chasm now exists between them, and others begin to leap across it. Some defect to Theodora, courtiers who believe in her reforms, or simply sense the wind shifting. Others stay with Justinian out of loyalty, or fear, or both. The palace staff starts to learn new choreography. Who eats where, who walks in which procession, whose documents are copied first. And the worst part, no one dares speak of it directly. You sit through a feast, lavish, gold-laden, with musicians plucking notes that sound like teeth grinding, and watch as Theodora and Justinian barely acknowledge each other. He raises a goblet to the court. She raises hers a few seconds later, deliberately, separately. In between courses, a minor noble says something careless about the Empress's latest edict. Some backhanded comment about women thinking they can rule with needles and thread. Justinian doesn't respond. Theodora does. She looks at the noble and says, "And yet, Your Grace, it's surprising how many kings are undone by what they never see coming." He chokes on a grape. The room laughs. Justinian does not. Historians still argue whether Theodora orchestrated some of the defections that followed, like the governor of Thrace suddenly converting to her preferred religious faction, or the merchant guilds donating only to her projects. But the shift is real, and it grows. Justinian becomes increasingly isolated. His reforms continue, but with less enthusiasm. His law clerks notice more edits, more contradictions, more attractions. He forgets to sign off on a tax adjustment and blames it on a courier. The courier, by the way, is never seen again. You find him one evening in the Hall of Maps, staring at a mural of the empire's borders. He doesn't speak, just stays, as if wondering if the fracture inside the palace is mirrored out there, along the coast, the mountains, the places he cannot touch anymore. And Theodora, she's in her element, gliding through marble halls with just enough warmth to disarm, just enough distance to command. She addresses the Senate in his absence, attends a dedication without him, holds an audience with foreign diplomats in a salon designed to look nothing like the throne room. There's one peculiar moment you'll remember. An envoy from Egypt arrives, bearing gifts, papyrus scrolls, spices, lapis jewelry. He kneels, holds out 2 boxes. "For their majesties," he says. Theodora takes hers. Justinian doesn't move. The envoy blinks. "My emperor." Justinian finally reaches forward, slowly, like a man touching something that might bite. Then, beneath his breath, "One empire, 2 centers." The envoy pretends not to hear. "But you did. And so did Theodora." She doesn't react. Not immediately. But later that day, she removes a mosaic from her private hall, one depicting 2 joined crowns. It's replaced with a different image, a single scepter, flanked by doves. Symbolism, you think, or a warning. The paranoia seeps deeper. There are rumors of intercepted messages, of bribes, of forged edicts. No one knows who to trust. The palace begins to feel like a mirror maze. Every smile potentially a dagger, every silence possibly a trap. You even notice the architects change. A hallway once used jointly by their staff is now locked. A prayer room has been repurposed. Doors once open are now guarded. The entire layout of power is being redrawn, not on maps, but in floor plans and routines. And the people suffer for it. Petitions go unanswered longer. Projects stall. Some laws are enforced twice, others not at all. The empire isn't crumbling, but it's starting to wobble. And all because 2 people, once united by ambition and affection, now can't bear to breathe the same air. You wonder if they even remember why they started drifting, or if it's just momentum now, because at some point, a rift becomes its own engine. And now, as you walk these candlelit halls, you no longer ask whether they'll find each other again. You start to ask how long this palace can stand with two suns in its sky. You cross into Theodora's private quarters and feel it instantly. The temperature drop, the stillness in the air, the kind of hush that tells you someone important is trying very hard not to vanish. There's no music here today, no poetry readings, just the soft crackle of a brazier and the rustle of papyrus as she reads alone, surrounded by candles that seem to burn a little too low. You didn't expect it, but she's fading. Not politically. Oh, no. Her power remains intact. Her followers loyal. Her cause is flourishing. But her body, not so much. She's been sick. And it's not just a bad season or overwork. This is deeper. You see it in her skin. Paler, thinner. In the way she rises from her couch now with a softness that wasn't there before. In how she speaks less, listens more, as if saving her strength for the moments that matter. Her ladies-in-waiting say nothing aloud, but their eyes dart more now. Their hands hover. She refuses bed rest, of course. She still attends council when she must, still walks the gardens on good days, still reads reports like nothing has changed. But you hear it, late at night, her cough echoing through the halls. A dry, deliberate thing she tries to swallow back like guilt. You wonder, does Justinian know? He does. Of course he does. But he doesn't ask. Not directly. You see it in how he lingers longer now near her chambers before turning away. How he consults her physicians more frequently, asks more hypothetical questions. One evening, you overhear him asking about a rare herb from Syria, one rumored to aid with weakness of the blood. He doesn't mention her, but you know, they both know. And this looming shadow of illness, changes everything. Not suddenly, slowly, like fog creeping up stone steps. Their silences grow less sharp, their avoidance more sorrowful. The energy of opposition drains, replaced by something else. Not love, not forgiveness, but awareness. A ticking clock in a marble room. One quirky rumor. Some palace attendants believe Theodora is writing her own eulogy, that she wants to control her final message, even in death. She's been seen speaking quietly with a mosaic artist, requesting soft hues and no excessive gold. She says she wants to be remembered clearly, not sainted, which is probably the most Theodora thing she's ever said. Historians still debate what she died of. Some say cancer, others, a wasting illness, perhaps a uterine disorder. There are no firm diagnoses, only the gradual retreat of her once immense physical presence. 1 month she skips a public celebration, the next, a Senate session, then a blessing at the Hagia Sophia, where a substitute speaks her words from parchment. It's not official yet, but people are preparing. You notice that the palace grows quieter, not in mourning, in anticipation. Theodora begins sending private letters, not political ones, personal, some to bishops, others to old allies, a few even to former opponents. Forgiveness, she writes in one, not for your sake, but for mine. And Justinian, he withdraws, not into law this time, into memory. You catch him one dawn standing alone in the nursery again, the door still unlocked, still unused, his hand on the edge of the child's bed frame. He doesn't speak, doesn't weep, just stands. You wonder if he's tracing back every step to see where they could have been different, where love might have survived if grief hadn't hit them like a siege tower to the chest. They still don't speak much, but occasionally, rarely, they are in the same room. She sits by the window in her chamber, propped by pillows. He stands beside the bed, arms crossed like he might be praying or protecting himself. She doesn't ask for help. He doesn't offer platitudes. But you notice her fingers brush his as he places a scroll by her side. Just for a moment, but long enough. "You still believe in law?" she asks softly. "I believe in what I can hold," he says. "A beat. You never held me properly," she murmurs. And Justinian, who has faced riots, invasions, plagues, says nothing. That's the moment you realize this isn't a reconciliation. This is a soft landing. Two souls descending together after a lifetime of turbulence. But outside the chamber, things are not soft. Her absence is noticed. Opponents begin to circle. Certain senators push agendas they wouldn't dare before. The church, which always found Theodora's politics unsettling, regains ground. Justinian senses it. The equilibrium is shifting. The palace starts to change again. Her wing is quieter. Fewer visitors. Fewer appointments. The gardens grow a little wilder where she once walked. Her charities continue, but her speeches are read by others. She's slowly being replaced by systems, as if history itself is preparing to close her chapter. One morning, you find a mosaic artist sitting alone, covered in dust and colored shards. He's halfway through the design she requested, her hand raised in blessing, eyes serious, but not stern. "No crown, just a halo." She said no crown, he tells you. But she didn't say no light. Even now, she edits her legacy. And Justinian, he returns to law. Because what else is left? He buries himself and reforms again. Religious structure, tax restructuring, rebuilding projects. He is efficient, distant, mechanical, but every now and then, you catch him looking out toward the wing that once housed a lioness in human form. He doesn't visit, but he feels her. You do too. This isn't just the slow loss of a woman. It's the slow vanishing of a center of gravity. And when she finally leaves this palace, whether by carriage or coffin, you know the empire will feel it. Even the stones will. You feel it before anyone says it. A hush that settles over the palace like the first snowfall. Silent, soft, undeniably final. Theodora is dying. She hasn't been seen in days. The windows of her wing are shuttered. Her physicians come and go with tight lips and slower steps. The guards no longer stand alert. They lean, stare, pray. And the palace has adopted a new rhythm. That of waiting. Waiting for the last touch of her hand. You find yourself in the chapel again. The same one where she once knelt, alone, beneath flickering candlelight. But this time, the candles have been doubled. Their flames dance higher, longer, as if trying to light her way. Justinian doesn't attend the morning prayer. Is already in her chamber. You enter the hallway, quietly, respectfully, like the walls might scold you if you step too loudly. Inside, her breath comes slow. Too slow. You hear it before you see her. Then you turn the corner and there she is. Not the firebrand Empress. Not the co-ruler of an empire. Just a woman, frail, tucked beneath layers of silk and shadow. She opens her eyes when he approaches. No one else is present. Not now. Not anymore. He sits beside her, knees cracking louder than he wants them to. She laughs once, barely. "You always made too much noise," she whispers. "And you never listened," he replies. There's no venom left. No pride. Just the echo of old patterns softened by memory. They sit like that for a long time. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. Maybe they don't know anymore. You listen from the hall as she asks him to read. A scroll lies nearby. One of hers. A legal code she drafted on women's property rights. He reads it aloud, voice trembling, like scripture. She interrupts him midway. "Do you remember her laugh?" He stops, stares. "The baby," she says. "She had your laugh." He nods. But he doesn't speak. Not yet. Then she reaches out, a hand thinner than parchment, veins blue like fine ink. He takes it, carefully, as if it might break, and for the first time in years, their fingers not together. Historians still argue whether Justinian ever truly loved her, or if their bond was always strategic. But you see it now. Not love in the romantic sense. Not anymore. Something deeper. He stayed, when he could have walked, when she told him not to, when the Senate gave him outs. He stayed. She breathes in. Then again. Then. You wait. He does not cry, but he does not leave either. He stays for hours, holding her hand long after it cools. When he finally exits the chamber, the guards bow lower than they ever have. No orders are given. No drums sounded. Just a nod, and the palace begins to prepare. The announcement is quiet. Theodora, Empress of Byzantium, is gone, and the empire holds its breath. A day of mourning is declared. Processions begin. Her body is laid in the imperial mausoleum she once helped design. The same marble she chose. The same mosaic pattern she insisted should glow in candlelight, not only in sun. One quirky detail. She had requested her favorite perfume, rose and saffron, to be worn by her pallbearers. Not to honor her. She'd joked once, but so that even the grumblers will remember something sweet. They do. You walk through the streets as the people gather. Some weep. Others simply stand, hats removed, heads bowed. They weren't all fans of her reign, but they knew power when they saw it, and grace, and ferocity. You enter the Hagia Sophia, where her final service is held. The dome above glitters with gold, but today it feels too bright, too alive for someone who is no longer here. Justinian sits in the front row, alone. His counselors are nearby. His guards stand vigilant. But he is alone in the only way a man who has lost both a wife and a compass can be. His hands don't move. His eyes remain fixed on the altar, as if waiting for her to rise and correct the priest's Latin. She doesn't. Later that week, he commissions a new mosaic for her. It will show her as she was, in her prime, crown high, eyes piercing. But behind her, just faintly, will be an outline of a child's silhouette, woven into the border pattern. The artist doesn't ask questions. He just nods. You walk through the palace in the days that follow, and everything feels off. Like the walls themselves are holding their breath. Conversations are shorter, meals quieter. Even the water in the fountain seems to flow with less enthusiasm. Because Theodora wasn't just part of this empire. She was its tension, its fire, its beating contradiction. Without her, Justinian reigns alone. He begins working longer hours, revising laws, holding audiences again. But you see it, the edge is dulled. He speaks more slowly, accepts suggestions more easily. He rules. But without her, the empire doesn't burn quite as brightly. They say he never remarried, never considered it. Some think it was out of respect. Others, guilt. Maybe both. You don't ask. You just pass him once in the gardens where they used to walk, now overgrown, slightly wild again, and you hear him whisper something to the wind. Tell her I remembered. You don't know if he means the law, the love, or the loss. Maybe all of it. You walk through a palace that feels larger now, but not freer. Theodora is gone, and with her, something essential has slipped from the stone. The walls echo differently. The shadows stretch longer. The empire still breathes, still moves, still shines in gilded halls and golden coins. But you feel the emptiness hiding in the corners, like a ghost politely waiting its turn to speak. Justinian rules alone. He wakes early, works late, eats simply. The fanfare of co-reign is over. No more mirrored processions, no joint signatures, no lavender room filled with laughter and tension and silk. Now, there's just scrollwork and silence. You pass his study one morning and notice something unusual. Her chair is still there, unmoved, untouched. Dust gathers along the arms, but no one has dared remove it. Maybe because he hasn't ordered it. Maybe because he can't. He begins new reforms. Yes, he is still Justinian. After all, the law must move forward. But he works now as though through a fog, pausing between sentences, rereading things twice, 3 times. His handwriting has grown tighter, almost cramped, like he's afraid the space you once filled might spill over if he leaves too much blank paper. You wonder, is this what legacy tastes like? Success that arrives just after the one person who would have challenged it is gone. There's a different kind of power in him now. Not the shining, confident force of their shared reign, but a colder endurance. He starts wearing simpler robes, attends fewer feasts, turns down elaborate offerings from governors. He seems allergic to anything that feels too opulent now. But occasionally, you catch glimpses, moments that betray the marble. You walk into the basilica during a nighttime inspection. He's there, alone, lighting a single candle beneath Theodora's mosaic. The image is complete now. Her hand raised, her eyes soft but focused, a halo surrounding her head. You notice the faint outline behind her, the childlike form sewn into the pattern, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. He looks up. You step back. He says nothing, but he leaves the candle burning long after he's gone. One quirky habit. He begins marking the calendar on her birthday. Not with ceremony, just a black dot, a silent acknowledgement. The servants know not to schedule anything that day. They call it the day the quill rests. You hear more and more stories of his solitude. He walks the gardens again, alone now, whispering to himself. Not madness, not quite prayer, just memory with nowhere left to go. Sometimes, he visits old sites they built together, the women's hospital she founded, the church she dedicated to Saint Mary the Protectress. He doesn't announce himself. He just watches, listens. The empire, for its part, continues. Victories in the West, a resurgence of order, the Hagia Sophia completed, laws that will last centuries. Justinian becomes legend in his own lifetime. Coins bear his image. Scrolls sing his name. But those who knew him before, they know better. They remember when his smile reached his eyes. They remember the sound of her laughter chasing down a corridor like perfume. Historians still argue whether this final phase of his life was his greatest achievement, or his slowest unraveling. Was he finally freed to lead without resistance? Or finally broken by the loss of the only person who ever told him no? No one agrees, but you see it in his eyes. He misses the fight. He misses her. Even her disapproval, her dagger-sharp corrections, her maddening ability to outmaneuver him in 3 moves or fewer. He was never at his strongest alone. He was at his strongest when he had someone strong enough to push back. One last letter is found decades later, tucked between pages of an annotated law code. Unaddressed, unsigned, but written in his hand. It reads, "Without your shadow beside me, even the sun feels harsh." It's not famous. Most historians dismiss it, say it's apocryphal, romanticized. But you know better. You've walked these halls. You've seen the chairs left empty. You've heard the pauses between his words. Theodora never truly left. She simply stepped into the spaces he couldn't close. And Justinian, he built cathedrals, rewrote the law, reshaped the empire. But the one thing he could never repair was the place beside him. So now, as the empire fades into evening, you settle beside these ghostly walls, still warm from candlelight, still humming with stories. You've walked through fire and silence, through gardens that bloomed with power, and bedrooms that wilted under grief. You've watched two people build the world's mightiest empire, not with swords or sieges, but with law and love and the unraveling spaces between them. Their story didn't end in war. There was no grand betrayal, no blooded tapestries, just the slow, deliberate separation of two hearts that once beat in sync and then, quietly, didn't. You picture Theodora now, her gaze steady, her hand raised, not in farewell, but in remembrance, and Justinian, forever reaching forward, chasing order, chasing justice, chasing the memory of her footfalls on marble floors. Outside, the palace is quiet. The city sleeps, and perhaps that's the only peace their empire ever truly knew. So as you drift now, let the flicker of mosaics and candlelight fade into the edges of your dreams. Let the names and laws and ruins slip away, because the empire was never just stone and scroll. It was two people trying to hold the world and each other together, and that was always going to be too much. Sleep well now. Let history keep the rest.